Ivor, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. Great to meet you. And, I had this whole idea of starting the conversation off a certain direction, and we talked offline a little bit. And I'm always amazed with, people that are taking a lot of heat and taking a lot of slack. And, what you're doing right now in your country of Ireland, I mean, you're fighting, and I don't think people realize. I can tell you right now in the United States, a lot of people don't understand what's going on over there. Could you shed some light for people that don't know what is happening in Ireland?
Yeah, sure, Mike. Great to be here. Well, it's quite simple now. A couple of years ago, I was watching with interest and a certain kind of horror of what was happening. But now it's established, so we can stick to total facts and explain how insane it is. So Ireland's gone over a decade plus from 8% foreign born to around 25%. And that's a very big figure. And you can see it. And the last few years since the COVID thing, it's exploded. So the mass migration, illegal migration, very little is refugee, and the vast majority is just non-legal, transient mass migration, mainly from Africa and other places in the world, not so much from Europe like during the Celtic Tiger. During the Celtic Tiger back in the 2000s, we had mega amounts of people, but they were Polish, Lithuanian. I used a lot of those people on jobs like plasterers. They came, they worked hard, they intermarried. That's real migration. So people need to understand I am not talking about normal, quote, migration. We have a mass infusion of people who are causing an enormous cost to our tax dollars. It's just nuts. So to give an idea, we last year hit the mega numbers of the Celtic Tiger in the 2000s, which were huge that I mentioned. But this time it's all undocumented migrants. A lot of the time they throw their passport in the trash can when they come over because they have no reason to be here. And when they get here, they have no passport. But the government and our puppeticians, as I call them, and the state media, which is most of the media, they scream at you if you say, what's going on? Irish culture and history and our whole system. We already had a homeless crisis. Now we've got a massive homeless crisis. They're stuffing hotels, nursing home repurposing. On top of that, they're building centers around the country, covertly. You're not allowed to go in, but people are going out with mobile phones and drones. I mean, these are industrial scale facilities, like kind of military barracks. So they're bringing in so many. Not only are they stuffing hotels, and one hotel near Dublin has pulled in $600 million or more over the last few years by filling itself, all our tax dollars, just paying for people to be housed, put a roof over their heads. But on top of all of that, and that's just one example, they are building industrial scale facilities that are needed to house the massive flow. Think about that. And there was a 72% saying the government needs to sort this out. And that was, I think, 2 years ago in an official poll. And they haven't done a poll since. So no matter what people say, when villages in Ireland, quaint villages, suddenly get a massive influx of young male, always young male migrants. Where are the women and children from Ukraine? No, young male migrants. When a village gets flooded and there's a whole load of demonstrations and the police have beaten on the people and used external forces to come and slap back the locals to force in camps of migrants. What I've described is the reality, right? In a minute or two. Now, that's what's happening to Ireland. And the centre of Dublin now is unrecognizable in the evening. People I know who do not want to engage in this topic have admitted quietly they don't go into Dublin anymore. And all over the country that's happening, and in villages quite remote. It's quite insane, Mike. And yet here we are. This is happening, and our puppeticians are aiding and abetting it and screeching at anyone who questions it as far right, racist, yada yada yada.
Yeah, I follow. Do you know Mick O'Keefe or do you follow him on X?
I've retweeted him, and I know that's another great point to raise, Mike. Last summer, it came out recently around 10 people in Ireland, including the one official news agency who's willing to cover this madness. They were investigated by the Irish police, and Twitter was requested to give their accounts, their private messaging under a subpoena, under, I believe, a kind of a drug law for drug trafficking, a special law from years ago. And luckily, Twitter refused, and in the end, Twitter won. But they were not told until recently. And Mick O'Keefe was one of those, which gives people an idea of, like I said, the collusion of the puppeticians, the state controlled media, which is most media now, or corporate controlled, one or the other. And of course, sadly, the Irish Gardaí or the police, who are always the keepers of the peace. That's the definition of their name. And they're meant to be just keepers of the peace as opposed to a government force, right? But they have to do what they're told. And our police force now, for some time, has been run from a British guy. Imagine, essentially a British guy. And when you look him up, you can't find out anything about him much, but he's not married. There's question marks there. A lot of people say MI6, classic, British intelligence. And I was told by guards in the force, we're like a corporation now. We get our orders from the board, from the top, and he says we have to follow them. That's Ireland now.
Here's what I wonder with all that. I mean, not only Ireland, but the rest of Europe, because at some point, something is going to break. I mean, it's breaking, right? And where people, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I also thought this would happen in America, and it hasn't either. But where people just have had enough. Enough is enough, and that threshold is going to get crossed. Do you see that occurring in your country?
Yeah, it's like it came up, Mike, with George Gammon the other day, similar conversation. And I wouldn't be negative. I said during COVID, it's all to play for. And in the end, we did quite well. The people who love freedom, honesty, integrity, authenticity, against the insanity of the COVID program. This one, it's a little concerning that people are so slow to wake up. Like, all you need is a sizable minority to get to a tipping point, and we know that 72% way back said the government need to get a grip on mass migration into Ireland. So now it would be much higher. And we know that there's always 20 or 25% of people who are wearing masks in their car who are completely deluded in mass formation. So they're lost. So if we're getting 75% saying they want action, that's kind of like 100% of the rational people in your population. So that's good. But the people willing to step up at the water cooler, even, or certainly publicly, more broadly, is still relatively low. It's growing. Conor McGregor in the White House there gave it a great kick in the ass, 70, 80 million views. And there are other people coming out very vociferously, like Michael O'Keefe and many others, who are calling it as it is. So it's good, but I just disappointed at the number of people who are coming out and saying, hey, our country is being destroyed. And this is no disrespect, Mike. Every time you got to say it, or the propagandists and the enemy will accuse you of being racist or far right, the usual slurs used to shut down the conversation. And we've had loads of migrants, like I mentioned, when all of half the world came to Ireland in the Celtic Tiger. It was fine. They all came and they worked hard and they had a reason to come here. The Vietnamese boat people, when I was a kid, came here when I was young, and people housed them and we sorted them out, and they started businesses and restaurants and didn't get any government handouts worth a damn. They were industrious and they came here. They were delighted to be here. We were delighted to have them here, right? So people need to understand it's nothing to do with normal migration. When you turn up the dial this high with people who have no particular skill or particularly a propensity to blend in and become part of the Irish culture and enrich it, right? When there's none of that and it's all rammed down our throats, and our cities and towns change completely. From a government who are pushing trans sex nonsense, they're taking out love of our history and tradition from our curriculum. They have been caught doing that. Literally everything they're doing is anti-human Malthusian, as Gammon would say. We have to sit and wake up and just say, we have been betrayed utterly by our politicians. Treason, the stink of treason is in the air. And we know as well, you probably want to ask about this, we know the politicians in Ireland and many other places, they are simply obeying the higher powers up top in the United Nations, the EU, Soros, all of these shocking, terrible influences. That's who our politicians are reporting to.
Yeah, it's amazing how they're able to kill any type of momentum or any type of dialogue by using these terms of being a racist or but it's interesting though how they keep finding ways to do divide us, right? Because the more divided we are, it's easier for to be controlled. We talked a little bit offline. I want to ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing some of what's going on with you, because you're getting attacked now on a whole new different front, right? For something may have been said, may not have been said, or misinterpreted. So
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting for me because a couple of weeks ago I did an interview with a kind of significant British news kind of outlet and a pretty famous journalist who does interviews on YouTube, not under the Ofcom regulators' auspices, but on YouTube where you can kind of speak freely.
So
And he
Ivor,
thought,
let me interrupt you. So not like BBC. I don't know all the British outlets, but not BBC. Can you say who
as
the
GB News. It was GB News, smaller and tends to approach more interesting topics. The BBC is State Pravda in the UK. It's like the Irish State Pravda. It's comical, hilarious, lunatic. But GB News tends to actually talk about reality, mostly.
so they're objective, in your view?
Pretty much when they started, yes. Now they're beginning to respond to pressure from the blob. But yeah, relatively objective, not so bad, yeah.
So okay, so share with me as much as you can, or if you feel comfortable, what happened and then what's been going on with you since. This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
Yeah, so interestingly, and because the interviewer, Neil, he wanted to talk about mass migration, and he had pinged me the day before, kind of indicating what the conversation might be. Well, it was not too structured, and I knew that. That's the way I roll as well, and I think you roll as well. Um, but something crossed my mind. I had met Michael Yon, the Green Beret and famed war correspondent in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, at a Maverick.org conference. And I was really impressed. But this guy. This guy knows his stuff. And he's analyzed the whole world from a military, tactical, and everything else perspective in a way that I hadn't really because of his expertise. So I interviewed him in Buenos Aires, and I didn't release the interview because I intended editing it because it was quite strong in content. I had no problem with the facts in it. I just thought it was a very heavy, negative message. He was talking about Ireland being marked for genocide, in his opinion. Now, he explained afterwards that genocide comes in many levels. The lowest level can be just being pressured to not use your own language and culture and move away from that. And that can move up to being kind of prejudiced in your own country against and other people favored when you're indigenous, all the way up to what we think of as genocide, where an indigenous peoples are kind of massacred. So that was great because he explained the word genocide for him was anything that seeks to take away an indigenous population's identity, culture, history, all the way up to perhaps running them out of their own country. So good. But I didn't release it because I intended editing it. And then it occurred to me during the interview with Neil, and I mentioned what I could remember from it, that he told me some fascinating stuff. That as well as the World Economic Forum, the UN, the European Union, the Rockefeller family, who are not Jewish, as an example, and Soros, who happens to be, Bill Gates, who's not, he listed out a whole load of oligarchical power centers. And he also noted that Zionism and extreme Zionism was also engaged in the world we live in, pushing all of these things that we are trying to react to. And he mentioned a few NGOs that were of that camp, driving migration into America, or invasion, as he called it, through the Darien Gap. And he mentioned facts, and I checked them afterwards, and they were facts. So I remembered this and I referred to it, and I was careful in the conversation because I knew there was some kind of weird thing in the world that if you ever criticize Zionism, you could be subjected to the anti-S slur, like anti-Semitic, even though it's a completely different thing. The Judaism religion's thousands of years old, Abrahamic, and it's a religion. But Zionism is a late 19th century political movement. And as Michael said in the interview, be clear, there are more Christian Zionists than there are Jewish Zionists. There are all creeds in Zionism, probably even Hindu. And he emphasized it's not about Judaism, it's about Zionism. So I kind of had that in my mind, and I mentioned Zionist type people in NGOs driving some of this. Very interesting. And I kind of, that was the main thing I said. And wow, the next day, GB News got a bit, you know, and I also got a bit. And I thought, surely this won't bring out the nut jobs, the kind of Zionist extremist people who scream anti-S. And I thought, no. But within a day or two, it was clear that it did, including some NGOs that I kind of referred to. And a couple of small newspapers did a hit piece. I mean, that's it. Now, the last couple of weeks, nothing happened, but it was a disgraceful hit piece, Mike. I mean, I could hardly even read it. So, just to give an idea, I went back to the interview with Michael and I pulled out quickly a minute or two, 5 or 6 instances where either one or other of us emphasized we were talking about Zionism. Michael Yon in the interview said, basically what we have is what you might say is a meta tribe, because it's tribes of oligarchs. They can be Russian, the Chinese, the WEF, Bill Gates, Soros. It's oligarchical structures, including Zionist type people. And they're all like frenemies or even enemies, but it doesn't matter. They're all joined together to build a power structure, power and control over the West mainly. So he was describing accurately what we're dealing with. And one part is Zionism and no part is Judaism. But the hit pieces came. And it was quite disconcerting to see them because it was so corrupt, the hit pieces. Even I was impressed. And I've been in hit pieces back in 21 because I was anti-lockdown and anti the mRNA mandates. I've been in hit pieces, big ones. This was unsettling because it was like, it was so sinister. You know, I'll finish with one thing. I replied, I only got 1 or 2 tags on this madness. Nothing happened because I think a lot of England and Ireland, they kind of know there's something weird about this slur and something really weird over there with the Zionist thing. So nothing happened. But I look back and quick as a flash with a quick search on my own X feed, 24, 23, and 22, I had repeatedly shared the Conspiracy 2001 movie with Kenneth Branagh, the big English actor. I'm a World War II buff, and this movie is about the Wannsee Conference in 43 in Germany, where they corporate style organized the mass murder of many people, more than Judaic people, also homosexuals and people against the regime and Eastern Europeans. I mean, they went all out on loads of people. But I was sharing that movie saying, this is a lesson, guys. So I've promoted the horror of the Holocaust. And tons of my friends, are Jewish in my network. So the insult to me was deep. Do you know what I mean? The insult was very deep and very sinister. That this kind of mine I'd stood on was waiting there for anyone who criticized Zionism. It was it was fascinating and sinister, I think.
Well, I think it's a whole new front now, right? Where you can I don't know, the the racist LGBTQ, that doesn't, in my view, it doesn't work anymore. So this is another
Yeah.
opportunity to create more divide. And I've had people on both sides of the spectrum in this, and I've my approach has not been. I don't think I've changed really. All I've said was, in regards to some of the stuff that's happened in the Middle East, October 7th, there's no way that the intelligence didn't know what was going to happen that day. It's a little stretch of land. That's cameras are everywhere. All right, I'm not the smartest guy here, but their intelligence, the IDF, their intelligence. I mean, they infiltrated the supply chain in order to blow up the pagers with Hezbollah, and they had no idea in regards to October 7th.
Yeah.
I just
I
don't
mean,
believe that. So I mean, that's been my approach in all this, and I wish all the war would stop everywhere. I just want it all to stop.
you know, I came out with that because obviously to a problem-solving engineer who's a war buff, exactly the same thing when I looked at it. And I don't like to be too certain, and you never say never. But I just looked at that, and what you said was apparent to me. I mean, it was so obvious. That was the frightening thing. Um, Absolutely no way. And Michael Yon, the interview, went through that, and he's a Green Beret. He said basically it's 5 minutes from fully cold, not a hot start, fully cold to get Black Ops up. Phone call comes in within minutes, no question about that. There's guys sitting around in their gear, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee with Black Hawks outside. The Black Hawks will be up in 5 minutes. They do 180 knots on full power. They'd be in the region in 20 minutes, half an hour max. You'd literally be spraying that area with high power weaponry. It was 8 hours. A whole McDonald's shift was his description. I mean, how ridiculous is it to suggest that that was sloppiness on behalf of such a capable people as the Israelis who have fought in such adverse conditions for countless, like decades? Of course, I mean, Mossad and the apparatus of the Israeli regime, not only do they run there as tight a ship as you could imagine, but arguably, depending on your opinion and the war experts or intelligence experts you listen to, they are running operations all over the place, right? So you just say, like, this is not a political statement. This is just an absurdity. It's like the pipelines, the Russian pipelines. That happens, and they say Putin did it to himself. It's like, how stupid do they think we are? Um, and we have a long, illustrious history of where you allow an enemy to cause, sadly, a furore in order to justify a massive, strategically crucial response. It's like it's like collateral damage you have to accept. So you allow the issue to get worse than it might have been, but then you get enormous payback for the whole country, you could argue, or they could argue, in terms of strategic support from the world to do what you need to do. This is not controversial, what we're saying. This is just obvious. And yet, I got blowback when I mentioned, Mike, what you just said. I mentioned it on Twitter. All I did was retweet an Israeli reporter, Efret, I can't
Effort,
pronounce her second
effort,
name. And
Fennickson.
I said, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've had
I
her on. I've
just
had her on
retweeted
here.
her. Yeah, I just retweeted her early tweet, and the Jerusalem Times came out within a day or two. And they even acknowledged that a day or two in advance, the chatter was being monitored, and the USA gave a warning that something was about to happen. Nothing was responded to. It was like so obvious. It's kind of hilarious. in a grim way, isn't it?
Well, and the last thing I'll say on that is, the training that had to have been done for this to occur on October 7th. I'm not a tactical war person, combat, but I have to believe you didn't put that together in a week. How are these paramotors or paragliders in the air training and nobody saw anything?
And they have to train in the air by definition. They can't do it in an underground cavern. Look, it is, and I don't like to use the word comical because it's a tragedy, like all the stuff that's going on in the world. But it is comical in its absurdity of what we're asked to believe. It's just off the wall. Um, yeah, that whole thing, I just said, okay, then, and I backed off. I just, rationality goes out the window based on ideology and based on powerful religious like beliefs, like I had a few people in the COVID network who I never even knew their persuasion. But when that happened, they attacked me like rabid dogs. And I realized, oh my God, they're extreme Zionists. And I never even had known that until that happened. And I retweeted effort. And it's like, wow, live and learn. What's going on?
How does that make you feel? What we've just discussed, and you go from, you go through COVID, and you feel like the sides are divided, and you're on one side, we're on one side, and then there's the other side, and then this front opens up, and it's another divider right there where people you were on the same side with you might not necessarily be on, and it's a reminder for me. I don't know. I try to be objective. I'm not saying I'm objective all the time because I'm human and you have feelings and the way sides in certain views. But on the same token, I thought this is what we do is just try to be objective with everything we're looking at here. And this is just to me another example of that, of another divider.
Absolutely. And I think, and there's no conspiracy theory in this, none of what we're talking about is an accident. I mean, sure, there's local powerful ideologies in politics in that terrible situation we described, but it's also got a big benefit on a global geopolitical level. Because when people are divided on X, or you can divide them on Y or Z, there's all the goals of X and Y and Z locally, all the programs, but then there's a meta goal of just having people divided on A, B, C, D, E, F, G, on loads of stuff. And that's the war that's being waged on the world's free citizens at the moment. It's keep them divided. The more war, the more conflict, the more viruses, the more financial crashes, the more problems, the more trans and family undermining, society undermining weird sex stuff that you can create. Anything you can do that divides people fulfills the bigger goal of a path to world government, to manage these ants in an ant farm. That's the simplest I can put it. And I have a root cause diagram of all the strategies. I mean, the Zionist thing isn't on it, but most of the big ones are, where I explain that there's all these different things. But the common thing of all the strategies, anti-meat agenda, CBDC, the climate nonsense, the COVID program, the trans and sex weirdness, all of these apparently different programs, they all have one common thing in their benefits, and that is a bubble that says divides society, undermines society. So that is fourth generation warfare. That's the 4D chess we're in. Every single nonsense that's occurring or tragedy is always thinking divides society as a bonus. I think that's where we are. And if you take the one we talked about, it took me a minute or two to look up the history of that, to just check, was I going mad? And quick as a flash, I found out that Netanyahu, I think in 2019, said we need to continue to support Hamas. Hamas is important strategically for us. I knew exactly what he means, to create the effect that we just talked about when an attack is exploited. I mean, they actually tell you. And another thing in the Michael Yon interview, I made the point that these kind of extreme Zionist elements, Michael was making the point, it's nothing to do with Jewishness. And I agreed with him. And I said, yeah. And I thought of it on the fly, I thought of an example. Netanyahu made Israel a laboratory for Pfizer. how could you have more contempt for the people of Israel, Jewish people? How could you be more anti-Semitic in some ways than to turn them into a laboratory for utterly corrupt big pharma? I mean, I could call him an anti-Semite if that's the case. Do you see it? Do you know how insane this is?
Do you think that, and no, see, Michael's on my show all the time. I mean, he's does amazing work. I mean, God, I think I've talked to him in 7 or 8 countries now, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, I have him and Matt Bracken. If you don't follow Matt Bracken, he's another great follow. He's a former Navy SEAL. But I have them. They'll come on together. I just did that last week, actually. And then Masako Ganaha, I've had on. She's out of Japan. Makes me want to go watch it. So you never put the interview up with Michael?
Well, I send it to you, and like I was going to
I
get
want to
to it.
watch it.
It was just I was so busy since November. I had some misgivings, and my wife watched it, thought it was excellent, but she said it's very grim for the Irish people when he's talking about, you know, these kinds of terms. And then there was the whole other thing, like I could bring on the anti-S slur kind of brigade, and all I did really was I just got delayed until recently when I did the interview and I thought of it. It wasn't that I expressly didn't release it. So I'll send you on a copy anyway. And I think it was released. Another interviewer with me at the time, great guy on Palisades Gold Radio. His name escapes me.
That's okay.
Anyway, he was with me and we co-interviewed Michael Yon and also Doug Casey in Doug Casey's home in Buenos Aires. And I think Palisades Radio went ahead and released it. I shared my sound files. He gave me some of his video. So ironically, I think it was released. But yeah, I described what happened when I just touched on it. But I love Michael's description. For me, it is perfect. There's a meta tribe of oligarchs that is our problem. And one influential bunch within that is the whole Zionist thing. But I mean, there's lots more. There's the Soros, there's Gates and the WEF. Bilderberg guys are there lurking in the background in all of their, you know, smoking evil, of course. And you got the American deep state and the CIA and all that. I mean, it's a lot of forces trying to gain full autonomy and power over the kind of geopolitical chessboard. It's as simple as that. There is no conspiracy theory, as you know, in any of what we're talking about. This is global geopolitical 4D chess, if you will. And we now know largely all the players, and behind them, they're shadowy figures for sure. But there's no point talking about those because we haven't got the documents.
Yeah, Doug Casey I've had on here a few times, and then his co-host on his show, Matt Smith, has been on quite a bit, and another two guys, huge amount of respect for. But what I was going to ask you is, how realistic is the Conor McGregor stuff that he's doing in Ireland? And before you answer that, in my view, I always feel like if you're getting too close to something, right? If you're getting too close to the deep state, or if you're really, really starting to uncover things, they find a way to either cancel you, remove you, either it's just, from the earth or society or whatnot. What are your thoughts on this whole thing with him and what he's doing?
Yeah, they are high stakes when you begin to really expose. Now, to be honest, he's not exposing any deep state. A load of people came at me when I promoted what he did recently in the White House, whining about him being pro-Zionism. Now, I honestly don't know what that's about because I don't follow him, and he must have said stuff. I honestly don't know, but I guess he's in with Trump in the Oval Office. He's got a lot of following, and he's relatively safe from crazy suicide stuff. But the key thing is, he's only whining about the mass migration disaster in Ireland. He's not exposing Epstein lists. He's not doing stuff that's really uh, worrying for the big boys. He's just giving out about the mass migration, which is one sub policy of theirs or strategy, and you're kind of allowed to give out about it. So I think he's probably okay, but the Irish government and the politicians and the media, which is owned by the government effectively, they went ballistic. And what they will do is not so much disappear you like the CIA might. What they'll do is try and destroy your reputation and use lawfare, just like was used against Trump. And we're seeing it now that, quick as a flash, when Gregor came out with this, caused them enormous embarrassment and their paymasters in the UN, of course. Um, Suddenly, the director of public prosecutions announced that they're going to look into him for potential inciting of violence in the Dublin riots. But the tweet he put out saying, guys, at this stage, we're at war, or something like that, was the day before the migrant stabbing of young children that caused the riots. So, like, yes, he's going to get a ton of heat from the establishment. You'll have fake accusations of all kinds of crimes. You'll get kangaroo courts will be convened. And even if he comes out in the clear, the damage will have been done with the kangaroo court. He's going to be subject to all of that, but he seems to be up for it, which is fantastic. But if someone doesn't act as a lightning rod, um, he's right in what he said. The 40 million Americans of Irish descent who always either come to Ireland or would like to in the future, they can forget about it. I mean, one friend of mine who's actually, he's actually quarter or a third Nigerian. He said, yeah, Dublin now is Little Soweto. Just says it himself. Can't be accused of being racist, right? Um, Ireland's going down in the next few years. If this torrent maintains, I'm not sure how recoverable it is in terms of realistically having a strong Irish culture and Irishness in our own land. A few more years of these numbers, I'm an engineer. I think you'll hit some inflection where it's not really recoverable. I think right now, if they stop the madness, I think actually you could, even though the young men who came in are utterly inappropriate by their nature, no disrespect to them, no judgment of them, but they're not blending type like any migration ever in the history. But I still think things could pan out and still have Irishness in the future. A few more years at this rate, Mike, I'd be inclined to accept we've lost that. Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
Do you see if in fact it is losing or is lost some type of unrest or kinetic within the country, or and how do you think it looks in the broader scale of Europe?
Well, yeah, in the country, the point I kind of made in a couple of interviews, including George yesterday, diversity is crucial, even though I never go out pushing DEI or anything for obvious reasons, because that's corrupt and it's a con. But diversity is important. And I've realized in the last few years, I took for granted my love of diversity. I've spent time a lot in Singapore, I've been in China, Argentina, El Salvador, all over Europe and European countries, the UK, where I was born actually. Um, Diversity is a magical thing, but you must protect it. The only way you can protect diversity, which the bad guys, keep telling us is great, is by maintaining to some extent the individual nation states, their culture and traditions, you know, not in some kind of museum, in living, in life. That's diversity. So I could go to France and feel the Frenchness in the air. It's stunning. I went when I was a kid, around 10. The difference, the beautiful difference, intoxicating. Then you come home and you tell people about it, right? But fundamentally, you must protect the nation states to have diversity. What are the big guys doing now? The bad guys, let's say, they are destroying all diversity. Ireland, Sweden now has bombs going off, become the rape capital of Europe, I hear, and it was the safest nation on earth, or in Europe 20 years ago. Germany has massive problems, you know. Turkey in 2015, similar to Sweden, developed huge problems. Hungary, Viktor Orban there is not allowing the mass migration, but one of the few countries that's doing anything. But I guess just to wind up the point I'm making is the guys driving this, it's not the immigrants driving this. They're just being promised loads of money and free housing and their cars repaired on the taxpayer's back, which happened recently, 2 days ago. I don't blame them for flooding over. But the people driving it, the NGOs, the UN, all the other players we mentioned, they are literally hell bent on destroying all diversity in the West and just turning everything into a big mixed up ant farm where history, culture, tradition, everything just slowly dies and rots on the vine. It's bad, isn't it?
It is. Well, and it's happening all over. And I mean, Turkey right now, and I haven't got an update what's going on over there in the last day or two, but they were experiencing some large amounts of protests, and to the point where I wasn't sure, is Erdogan going to survive? I mean, are they going to be ousted?
Yeah, I'm not too close to it either. I was thinking of a documentary I saw actually after Michael Young's interview. I sniffed around to see what he was talking about the NGOs, and I was shocked at what I found. And one thing was a documentary on Turkey's invasion of, I think, Syrian migrants in 2015. So that's really all I'm referring to. They suddenly got swamped out of nowhere. And I'll tell you something, it was nothing to do with Turkish people, that invasion. It was external forces. So it's always, and Sweden as well, it was external agencies were complicit in making Sweden suddenly flip and suddenly lose all thoughts of what it was to be Swedish and flood their own zone. So it's always external globalist forces that drive this. It's not the immigrants themselves, and it's not really the hapless people who don't even know what's going on. The Irish, the Swedes, the Turkish, they're kind of like, they're not sure what's going on. And that's because it's kind of covertly done by very influential forces, and it is done unto your country. Ireland is bent over the table now, so to speak, if I be vulgar. It's being bent over the table and attended to, shall we say. It's getting screwed. And the people just don't know why we're getting screwed. But you and I have an idea why.
Well, and this comes to, I know I'm running out of time here with you, but it also, it's the people will always say, I'm sure they say it to you a lot, what can I do, Ivor? What can I do? What can I do? And my response is to that, and it's another area that you're very, very familiar with, is you work from within your own scope, right? You try to, not even try, you get your health in order, you get your relationships in order, you get your neighborhood in order as best you can, familiarize yourself with your neighbors, your community, and people get mad because it's not the answer they want to hear, but the reality of it is we're not going back to the way life was before COVID. It's just not going to happen. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a tough one. In 22 or late 21, I really thought, right, we're kind of screwed, but I'm not going to tell that to people because all you're doing is collapsing the resistance and not giving people hope. I'd never mislead people, but kind of saying I think we're screwed, that's not a real general. That's a weak man because you always fight. Remember Trump? Fight, fight, fight. I think of that sometimes recently. Um, I think it became all to play for later in 22 and into 23 when people finally really rose up and questioned the COVID madness. I think right now, yeah, we're never going to get back to where we were and where we should be. Yes, but we can stop the rot if people just step up to their plate, like you said, within their own power. Don't go and be a martyr and get accused of being a racist or a far right or an anti-yes or whatever and lose your job and become weaker. Don't go crazy. Do what's within your power. Talk to people, buy local, work local, meet people in real life, make an effort to get beyond the virtual and the Facebook, exactly like you said. Use cash as much as possible and talk about this stuff and try and make it interesting for other people who are kind of hypnotized to have the conversation. Don't be threatening, bring up, something I'm kind of concerned about. I saw a thing in the paper the other day about who's driving X and Y. Like, what's going on? I'm curious. Pretend you don't know. Get a conversation going. Begin to draw people out in a non-threatening manner. Begin to make talking about the most important things in our world great again. I mean, that's all I want from ordinary people. My wife says from the Bible, the widow's mite, you do what you can. The widow in the Bible only gives like a tiny amount of money. And I think Jesus or something recognizes her and rewards her and makes an example of her because she gave what she had. People need to give what they have. Right now, most people are saying, well, this is kind of, I could get socially like embarrassed here, so I'll do nothing. I'll hide. I'll keep my head down. Okay, you don't need to jump out like me and get put in newspapers and attacked, but do what you can. Find people who are willing to talk about the enormous threats against our future, our children's future, our grandchildren's future. This is nothing less than the totalitarian kind of shithole, is what they want. So try and at least have the conversation with who you can have it with and try and nudge people along to take an interest in their own potential demise, which they should bloody well be interested in. I think you'd agree, Mike.
Yeah, and well, also though, and speaking in terms of America, I was talking to last night a gentleman by the name of Carl Denninger, and he pointed something out. We've been talking about the Howard Lutnick video that was on last week on the All In podcast, which if you haven't seen it, it's really good. Him talking about the sovereign wealth fund and the solution to do away with federal income tax in the United States, and it all sounds great. Now, is it going to work? I have no idea because you and I have just spent an hour talking about we're in uncharted territory right now. But I also think in terms of the United States, and maybe it's similar in your country, I don't think people have the stomach for this. I don't think people can handle really how bad a shape we are, how dire the situation really is. Now, when I say dire, life is going to go on. We're not going to be Mad Max tomorrow.
Yeah.
Anything's possible, but I don't see that. People are too fat and lazy anyway right now to do anything. I mean, but also, I just don't think I don't think they have the stomach for it.
Yeah. You know, that strikes a chord with me, and I've been saying it since probably the start of 2020 or early in 2020 mostly. And it's been agreed with in conversations with quite a few people who are senior corporate guys, friends of mine in the network, who know everything we know. But in fairness, they can't talk about it and they don't want to go there. Their whole livelihood and big salaries is dependent on Omerta. But privately, it's great where you can discuss it and we're all on the same page. But people, one guy, senior guy, said to me, he's watched the last 20 or 30 years, safism change our society and the work world irrevocably. Everything became safety for the last 20 or 30 years. Safety shoes in the warehouse where you got heavy drums, fine. They came in. Makes sense. Then they went out, and now it's everywhere on the site, including outdoors. That's tip of the iceberg. Everything's safety, and the bureaucracies of safety grew, and they wanted to keep growing and ensure their jobs. So they wrote more and more safety stuff. And safism, he said, we now have a population between that and the head on the phone and all the nonsense and virtue signaling that's been coming for 20 years. It's not just, it didn't start in COVID. We have a soft, safety obsessed, cowardly, and he said, I use that word advisedly because he's a World War II buff too. He said, cowardly society, right? You turn anywhere, throw a stone in a crowd, you'll hit a coward. It's sad, Mike, but it's just the reality of where we are. And I agree, everyone is so dumb and soft and hypnotizable. I sometimes joke I'm a bit ashamed of my species after the last 5 years, but it's kind of a joke. I'll keep fighting because I'll fight on behalf of all of us. But it is disappointing, and what you said, people are soft and fat and self-centered. They've got a God-shaped hole since 50 years ago. They gave up religion, and humans need something spiritual. It's our nature. So what did they leave behind when they gave up the religion? Or the religion was encouraged to be given up? There's a bit of that too going back, right? They were left with a God-shaped hole. What if they filled it with iPads, Samsung phones, virtue signaling by wearing a dirty blue bit of paper to save granny? They filled it with junk. And there's no shortage of bad actors and power players enthusing in filling populations' God-shaped hole with all kinds of sinister nonsense. So it's tough, but you know what? We will prevail. And I think if the minority who still have valor, principle, I've used that word so many times in the last few years, just a sense of principle, critical thinking, what's right, what's wrong, getting to the facts and the truth of the matter, and speaking your mind, speaking up in spite of any slurs. I think there's a minority growing that is willing to stand for principle as a value and often say it as it is when it hurts a little socially. And if that keeps growing, Mike, I think we could recover this vessel and not go down.
Where can people find you, Ivor?
Yeah, if you Google or search my name, interestingly, you can still find my Twitter, YouTube, and kind of Facebook for the moment. There's no shadow banning, I think, in the search of my name. But ivorcumminsworkshops.com is where I got my whole new endeavor to strengthen the people. I do workshops, 2.5 hour, involved, stuffed with my 30 years of psychology and corporate experience, the best takeaway tools for mental strength. And I also do a critical thinking, and I also do a weight loss masterclass, and I'm going to add more. So I'm becoming an educator in the more traditional sense, which I've intended doing for many years, as well as my controversial interviews that I sometimes do with people like you, Mike, people like us.
Ivor, I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing this. Look forward to following your work, and maybe have you come back on. We'll talk more about the workshops, and I'm sure whatever the state of the world is, the next time there'll be a whole nother more topics to discuss on that because everything's changing so fast.
Absolutely, Mike. And a final thought: we won't worry. It's all going to be okay at the end.
We have no choice.
Positive, stoic, fate, amor fati. It'll be what it'll be. We'll do it the best we can in the meantime.
Look forward to the next time. Thanks, Ivor. Mic drop.
Thanks, Mike. Bye now.